Hello, my name is Justin Johnson, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this very special event presented by the BFI and Radio Times Television Festival. When we left his Dark Materials at the end of last year, we left Lyra and Pan, who had been betrayed by Lord Asriel, who had in turn opened a bridge to a new world, losing Paul Roger in the process to do so. We left Lyra walking into the unknown. Now, almost a year on, the show moves on to Philip Pullman's second novel of the trilogy, The Subtle Knife, and we learn more about Lyra's destiny, the witches show their hand, and the mysterious Jopari, a new incarnation for Colonel James Parry, makes his mark. I'm so pleased that we are joined today by costume designer CAROLINE MCCALL, writer Francesca Gardiner, and actors JADE ANOUKA, Ruta GEDMINTAS, and Andrew Scott. A very warm welcome to you all.
Hi.
I'm just going to start off with Francesca, if I can. So, Francesca, you are one of a group of writers working on his Dark Materials. And I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about when you are working on a screenplay that's obviously based on an existing book, in this case, The Subtle Knife, and how you kind of keep that balance between kind of being respectful to the book, but obviously bearing in mind this is a completely new medium and you're making a film of it effectively.
Yes, particularly when the books are so beloved, it's a real challenge. And the most wonderful thing I think about Philip's writing is that he uses metaphor so beautifully. And the thing about television is that it's such a literal medium. And so you have to really find a way of walking the line between, you know, staying absolutely true to the ethos and the messages of the story, whilst also finding a way to kind of visually lean into this new world that we're creating, because we've made various changes by necessity in terms of, you know, Will's story is now in a contemporary world, in our contemporary world, and the books were written, you know, sort of 20 years ago. So the world has changed a lot since then. So that was one challenge that we have. And so, you know, kids have mobile phones now. So Will isn't going to be searching for information in a library. And I always thought that was quite interesting, that a mobile phone is sort of like an alethiometer in a way, you know, that Lyra might be interested by that. So that was one of the challenges, but it's been really fun to sort of find, yeah, and also, you know, a task to try and balance that.
And how does the process work in practice in terms of how is the kind of the writing divided up between the books and the different episodes, so to speak? And are you working together in a sort of writer's room, or are you working all independently?
No, we have sort of story conferences where we all get together at the Bad Wolf Studios and talk a lot about what we love and how we might, you know, work around, emphasize certain elements in the stories, and then we all scatter to the wind and try and communicate as best as possible to make sure that you know, that it's a bit like that game, that heads, bodies and legs game, where somebody's drawing the head and someone's drawing the torso and someone's drawing the legs, and you have to make sure that it's all matching up, and that takes some time. But it's been amazing to work with the other writers. I love Jack's writing. I've been a huge fan of his for ages, so it's been a real honor to work with him.
And Andrew, I'm going to try and have a sort of spoiler-free conversation I can with you, but it's quite difficult bearing in mind that you made an appearance in series 1, but obviously series 2 really is where your character comes to the forefront. And you're playing this incredibly multi-layered character who we know as Colonel James Parry, but is also Dr. Groom and Jopari. And did that make it very difficult in terms of how you approach that role, bearing in mind that this is this sort of multifaceted character?
Yes, it was. It's confusing. There's a lot of sort of the literary language is something that you have to understand, as well as the language of the world. But once you understand that, it's pretty easy. And actually, the fun of it is that you're playing different characters, and the challenge of it, I suppose, is to find some sort of through line between his different guises.
And did you read the books as well to get yourself into the character, or is that kind of actually too confusing and you just looked at the script?
I didn't focus too much on the books. No, I always think in literary adaptations. I've done a few literary adaptations in the past, and I think sometimes what's important is what the priority is anyway, is to interpret what Jack and Francesca and the other writers have written as a teleplay rather than the book, because that's the medium we're concerned with. So it's to sort of be respectful but not overly reverent about the books. But I do think that the message of the books is genuinely extraordinary for children, and the way he talks about spirituality, particularly for me, is particularly special.
And Ruta, you've rejoined the cast for season 2 as Serafina Pekkala, and we also have here Jade, who plays Ruta Skadi, which obviously we've got 2 Rutas there, which I'm going to try and navigate as best I can.
Good luck.
But can you? I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about the sort of expanding kind of cast of witches, and in terms of getting back into the role, is that something you found quite easy?
Well, we had a great team giving us lots of information continuously. So it wasn't easy, because we had such a huge job to do with the witches, and it was ever changing to fit in with the various different ensemble storylines. And particularly with Serafina and Ruta Skadi, to get their relationship right was really, really difficult, and finding the right conflict between them, how long they've been a team, how long they've been at odds with each other, where were we going to place that within this season. So it was difficult, but really fascinating, and I think we got to a really good place in the end. And yeah, I can't wait to see it all pan out.
Lord Asriel has opened the way from this world to another, and the child of the prophecy is on her path. Lee can help her. We must decide our part to play. Queen Skadi.
Queen Serafina Pekkala, that man does not belong here.
He is here at my reckoning, as are you.
Ruta Skadi is angry.
Everyone should be angry.
Sisters, Katya Circa has been taken prisoner by the Magisterium. I have word they are rounding up anyone who questions their authority. The way those animals in the Magisterium have cracked down upon the world since the opening. Towns tightly controlled by armies.
We're out of our depth here.
Shut up, Hester.
So the time has come to act, to show the Magisterium that their actions have consequences. And I am here to beg you, Serafina Pekkala, and all the sisters here, join me in rescuing Katya. I believe we have no choice.
The prophecy was clear. We must find the child.
The prophecy is not all there is.
You risk too much.
The Magisterium has thrived under your indifference. Ruta Skadi will show them we are indifferent no more, with or without your clan's help.
Is it difficult when you've kind of created a role and then you go away and you do other jobs and you have to kind of come back to that role, particularly because, as you say, there are new relationships then to form and so forth?
Yeah, but I mean, I don't think it's confusing going to another job and then back again, because you're picking up the same person again. It's just, you're just adding more layers and fruit to it, really. So it's not, you don't kind of step out and get confused with other roles. It's just everything else fades away and you're back in with that role and you're just adding to it. And yeah, hopefully hopefully finding more layers and more interest in there. And it's been brilliant having the other witches come on board, because obviously we focused just on one witch in the first season, and then to have the other witches come in and what that feeds into your own character, it was amazing. It was amazing working with those girls. It was just I really enjoyed it.
And Jade, can you tell us a little bit about actually getting the role of Ruta Skadi and how you kind of channeled your inner witch?
Did I channel my inner witch?
I don't know, maybe you did.
Yeah, it was kind of brilliant when I got the got the audition for Ruta Skadi. Obviously, the first season hadn't come out yet, but I knew of the books and I knew of the stories and I knew how big a deal it would be to be part of it. But also, I just thought she's such a cool character, and so really wanted to be her. I really wanted to get a chance to play her, and it's her kind of her pride and her sense of justice really chimed with me, and it felt like, you know, fight for what you believe in. Felt like something that I could definitely get on board with.
And when you're creating these characters' costumes, Caroline, is that something you do right at the very start of the process before even the casting process happened, or do the actors actually kind of influence the designs in any way?
Well, I've had the thought process and done lots of research and the direction that I think that I'm going to take it in. But then it's a collaborative process with the actors when they come on board and what ideas they bring, and also the practicalities of costumes, particularly the witches, that influence the directions in which the design process heads.
And Andrew and Ruta and Jade, when you're actually wearing your costume, does that kind of really then help to bring your character to life? I mean, do you actually really find yourself then, once you're actually wearing the clothes themselves, behaving in a particular way?
Yeah, I think that's really a testament to Caroline, actually, because it doesn't happen all the time. But when you have a particular costume that's been really worked on and thought about, the minute you slip it on inside the trailer, you just feel like you're stepping into character, and I think she did a fantastic job with that. I know, especially with Serafina's dress, I think we had about 50 dresses that we went through, and different iterations of the dress to lengths and fabrics and styles and armors and everything, just to get it exactly right. And the thought behind every single one, it wasn't just let's try this fabric, it was to do with their world. And I just think it's such an important collaboration between the actors and the costume department. It really helped me anyway.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that, especially with the witches and how we have to move as well with our clothes, with the costume, having that conversation about what works with our style, our clan of witches, how we want to hold ourselves, how we move, is just so brilliant when that is a conversation. So yeah, it's great.
Yeah, it is. And I think particularly if my character basically wears one costume. You know, he wears the same thing for the whole thing. So we talked a lot about, it's amazing how in particular scenes to show the journey of the costume, like in taking one layer off or adding a hood. But there's an extraordinary amount of detail that goes into it. I wear a beautiful coat that's hand embroidered that Caroline, I can't remember the name of the person who did it, but it's this extraordinary design on the back of the coat. So the amount of thought that goes into it is really, really extraordinary. It's one of the, I think a lot of actors really, and as I was saying, it doesn't happen on every job where you get to be as collaborative as Caroline is. So yeah, it was really, really fun.
Caroline, I wonder
Thanks, everybody.
Caroline, I wonder if you can just talk us through a little bit about the process that you go through when you receive a script, and because presumably you have to really get into the heads of these characters in terms of when you're deciding how they're how the clothes that they're wearing or that they've chosen or how they're decked out. I mean that's quite a big process to go through, I imagine. Can you just tell us a little bit about what the work that actually entails?
Yes, well, it starts with the script and reading the script at length and any notes to costume, and then going back to the books and any reference from the books. And then I get sort of initial ideas of what I'm thinking, and then discuss them with our producers about what if I'm on the right page of where we're going. But you know, so for the witches, I then looked in, because the clans had to be different had to be slightly different. I looked into where all the different clans were, and because the witches are sort of elemental and Cloud Pine is part of them, I wanted their costume to be part of their world, part of their environment. So looked into the elements that existed in their different regions, and that's where the kind of colours and the metals of their armours came from. And then with, you know, with a character like Jopari, who is 3 characters, and is described as a shaman, and in the book is dressed as a shaman. It was what we wanted to do as was to see these 3 characters, to see how they could be amalgamed in the one look, so that there are elements of his costume that could be of the 3 characters, and that you know, I looked at shamans and traditionally how they are represented, and we thought that in our version, rather than a feathered headdress, in this tribe that Jopari lives, he could have had this coat that he's had, that he's explored in, that is now completely broken down, that it's been embroidered, and so that when he does his trance and when he's a shaman, he has a hood that has his osprey demon embroidered on it. So it all comes from the source, and then it's developed, and everybody contributes along the way.
And Francesca, I wonder if you can just tell us a little bit about how, once you have at the back of your mind who the actors are or the casting's been done, especially I guess when you're working from season to season, does that in any way kind of influence the writing when you know the actor's work already, or do you just have to sort of just think about the character?
Oh, I think it definitely influences the way you are thinking about the character, because suddenly, you know, you have such a strong feeling for these characters that you're writing, but then suddenly the face is clear, and you know the kind of timbre, or you can guess the kind of timbre that the actor's going to bring. I was so excited when Jade came on board, when Andrew came on board, because I knew that they were going to bring these very particular qualities to these characters that I love. You know, for example, with Jopari, I think one of the things that I really loved about him in the books was the potential for him to be quite eccentric, and also the potential for the sort of warmth of his character to come through. And I knew, having seen Andrew's work before, that would potentially be something that he could really delve into, and that was just exciting for me. I think it's also that when you're working on these scripts and you're going through lots of drafts and things, it's so exciting. It reinvigorates you when you've got the cast on board, because you're like, oh my goodness, it's coming alive, because so often you're just working with a blank screen. So it's lovely to have that. And with Jade, you know, knowing how important it was for me that the witches, that in particular Ruta Skadi, was this sort of epic warrior, and everything that the Magisterium were afraid of, you know, in the sense that this sort of wonderful, powerful woman who, you know, in a series that's all about consciousness, really represents freedom of thought and strength in a sort of feminine way. That was really exciting to have a face for that. So yeah, we're so lucky on this show that we've got such an extraordinary cast.
Centuries ago, some pig-headed philosophers invented a tool for their own undoing. A subtle knife, also known as a sahetra. This knife could cut not just flesh, but spirit. It could slice between worlds. It could kill immortals.
You have this knife, do you?
No, but I want to find the person who does. I believe a new bearer of the subtle knife is soon to take up the mantle. We need to find them and take them to Lord Asriel.
Asriel?
You know him?
I don't like Asriel.
Like him? Who does? This is much, much bigger than that. Don't confuse the man with the mission. Mr. Scoresby, there are two forces that have always been at war with each other. Those who repress, who command, who don't want us to be conscious, inquiring beings, and those who want us to know more, to be stronger and wiser, to explore. And those two forces are lining up to battle as we speak, and if the right side has any chance of success, Asriel will need the knife.
That may well be. But I come here for one reason. And that's a girl named Lyra. Not to help her father. She's the best person I know, and she's in danger. If you don't have the knife and you can't help her, I'll be on my way.
You love this girl?
Yes. More than Asriel. He just left her. Fend for herself. Imagine leaving your kid like that. I never had a daughter. Haven't been that lucky. But if I did, I hope she'd be half as strong and brave and good.
I did.
Did what?
I left my boy. My son.
When the cameras actually start rolling, is there any point where the script is going to change further, or is it then pretty rigidly as it is? Is it in stone?
I wish that were true. I really wish that were true. I'm always really. I mean, it's funny because on a show of this scale, with all of the different departments and with everything that that a giant production entails, it means that we don't actually get an awful lot of chance to kind of chat and communicate sometimes. And I'm always really keen to get the story and the dialogue as crisp and as beautiful as possible beforehand. But this is the world of television, so there's always some things that you haven't foreseen or scenarios which you then need to tweak at the last minute. So I should always really put a little post-it note of sorry on the script to say.
And Andrew, I'm sure this would never be the case with Francesca's work, but are there any points where, as an actor, you do kind of obviously really get into your character so much, you do start to think sometimes, well, my character wouldn't say that, and would you ever kind of bring that up on a set? Do you have that kind of?
I would never change a word. Yeah, you do. Of course you do. It's sort of, you don't. It's script is a funny thing because it doesn't become a script until it's performed. That's what its intention is. It's not there to be privately read. It's there to be acted, and so you don't really know until you're on set whether something works. And usually, actually, it's about editing. I think that's usually the thing that you go, actually, you don't really need to say that. And I think the challenge in this story is that because the plot is very intricate. Sometimes you're like, what? Where am I? Who am I? Which world am I in? You're kind of like, so it's important to get the story across, but sometimes what audiences don't like, of course, is too much exposition. And so it's what you can do to make it clear, but also to make it actable. And sometimes it's about an editing process, or sometimes you say the thing and then it can become edited or added to once the cameras stop rolling.
And Jade, you're playing as we touched on with Francesca, this incredible kind of warrior witch queen, and it's a very physical role, and there's a lot of kind of action sequences as well. Was there a lot of training that you had to do in terms of once you actually got the role? Was there an expectation that you'd be a warrior in everything you did?
Yeah, there was. I think I did do a bit of training. It started just for my own sake. I knew that I was going to be held up by my midriff, and I was going to have to hold myself up. So I thought I'd better do a couple of sit-ups before I get on set. And to kind of we did as witches try and kind of get some real core strength, because obviously on some days when you're filming, you're kind of hanging from the roof for quite a long time. So you do have to be quite strong. But I loved all that. I love a good reason to get fit, and then also the choreography of the fight sequences as well. So there was some time learning that before we actually got on set, doing rehearsals with the stunt team, which was brilliant.
I mean, typically, if you're shooting and rehearsing for a kind of complex kind of fight sequence, how long would you have to make that work?
Well, it's initially I did about 3 days before, right at the beginning, and part of that I think was for the team to see kind of where I was at, because I didn't audition with any fight sequence, and so they didn't sort of know where I was and what my kind of level was of not only fitness but in how quick I could pick up the kind of the moves. So we did sort of three days of that, which was great. But then as we got through, as the months went on and I was filming and scenes slightly changed, also slightly changed were the fight sequences. And so then I had to sometimes pick them up on the day.
And Caroline, would you, bearing in mind there are fight sequences and there's all sorts of different set pieces going on, would you have kind of backup costumes, or do you have to be very, very quick on the hoof to make reparations if there needs to be?
No, we had, I can't remember how many, maybe 6 versions of Jade's
I think so.
costume, because it has to withstand so many situations. So there was a fight costume for a practical length for fighting. There was a flying costume that would hold the harness and hide the harness, and then sort of standing acting without the need for for pads or harnesses costume, and then various levels of breakdown for the situations they were in. And yes, Jade and her witches were incredibly patient, because they weren't the easiest costumes to get in and out of, because of all the things we had to hide. Harnesses are rather bulky and very uncomfortable.
And for Jade and Andrew, did you both, and I certainly know the answer in terms of Jade, that there were sequences where you had to do a lot of green screen and there were special effects kind of dropped in. Was that the same for you, Andrew? And if so, can you both just tell us a little bit about the sort of challenges of working with green screen, and when you are not the only person on screen, but actually there's going to be stuff dropped in later on?
Yeah, that's hard. A lot of the scenes that I'm in with Lynn, Manuel Miranda are in a parachute, and it's a small space, and you're going through a storm, so they just throw buckets of water at you from 5 o'clock in the morning on. The rest of the day goes on for days.
Very intimate.
Yeah, intimate. And so Caroline had a couple of some towels and some hot water bottles and stuff like that. But yeah, on green screen it can be, let's face it, it can be quite weird and boring, actually. So you really do have to exercise your imagination, because you're sort of flying and you're imagining that you're looking at these great big cities, or you're looking at, particularly with the demons, they have a thing called a puppet pass, which is a take that you do with the puppets, so that the extraordinary puppeteers are able to go in and really, it's very good for us actors as well, because you can really imagine what way the demons are going to behave, and they're really experts at what they do. And it's all playfulness. So having a little puppet to act with is really fun, and can break the kind of it's quite a weird atmosphere being in a green screen studio, because you lose sense of time and light and all that kind of stuff. So it is hard. So Lynn and I just sang show tunes, and we got through it.
So
what about you, Jade?
I was going to say, you're lucky you had Lynn there. A lot of time I was just being hung from the ceiling on my own, with lots of green around me.
Oh God! Wow! Yeah, of
being
course.
told what I'm looking at, and again with chucked water at for days on end. Which
God, psychologically, that sounds pretty tough, actually.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's funny, because you kind of think, oh, maybe I've only been here for half an hour, or maybe it's nearly wrap time. You have no idea. So, or is it lunch? Have I had lunch today? So it is, but I do quite like the fact, like you said, Andrew, about your imagination does get quite stretched. You have to use that, and I think that's quite a fun thing, actually, is being, having to kind of visualize cities or whatever you're seeing, or animals, or whatever it is that you're seeing, or a big submarine, whatever it is, and just and someone is just shouting what's happening, and you're just having to go through it. So yeah, I do quite like it, but yeah, after a few days you do go a bit doolally.
Witches of Lake Inara, hear me. We are facing devastation on a scale not seen in centuries. The Magisterium will pay for their crimes. But we cannot lose sight of the great war ahead. The prophecy states that life in all of the world depends on the child. She is more important now than ever. We must find Lyra before anyone else does.
I wonder, Caroline, obviously you've had a lot of experience with shows like Downton Abbey and Doctor Who, and Little Dorrit, for example, some of which are kind of rooted in history, so there's a sort of historical research perspective. But when you're working in a show that is more kind of fantasy based, is that kind of more sort of liberating, or actually does that make it more difficult because you're just having to be sort of, it's like a blank page almost?
It's more difficult, I think, because you have to make the rules, and there have to be rules, otherwise it's just a free-for-all. And so series 1, I'm sort of making the rules of Lyra's world and what the technologies were and what which clothing was appropriate, and then for each group, the Egyptians, and then in Cittàgazze again could have been many things, but then narrowing that down and deciding what that would be and what that look would be was tough but exciting, and sort of really, really enjoyable in the end of where we went with that.
And Francesca, are there any characters when you're writing the show that you actually really enjoy writing for? You actually kind of really feel like you're sort of in tune, or are there any characters, conversely, that you're less keen on? I know that's a bit of a terrible thing to say, but is there anyone you just think, actually, I really just don't like writing this character?
Careful.
Bearing in mind it's not going to be a witch or Jopari, clearly.
Yeah, actually, do you know what? Both of them awful to write for. No, I mean, I'm such a massive fan of the books. I'm like a horrible fangirl, and basically badgered Jane Tranter to get me to write one of the scripts when I'd come in for a completely different project, and I was like, oh my gosh, you're doing his dark materials, just let me in. And so I love all of the characters. I particularly love channeling. I think having the Magisterium, this cult of...
See, I always think the Magisterium must be the most difficult to write for in a way.
Oh, well, if you can, I mean, I find it a really fun way of channeling some of my anger right now, is because it's a cult of old white oppressed men who want to control the world, and you know, like, there are parallels, aren't there? And so I think and all of the characters who are fighting against that, you know, oppressive ethos, they're doing it in so many different ways. And you know, that whole theme that runs through about sort of free thinking, freedom of thought, and innocence versus experience. These are such huge, meaty themes, and so wonderful that they're in what's, you know, categorized as a children's series, but really it's so beyond those kind of categories for me. So yeah, I love getting to grips with all of the characters in this series, because there's so much to play with. There's so much to kind of delve into. And
we're almost running out of time, but I just wanted to ask Jade and Andrew, when you're playing a character, regardless of whether they're sort of perceived as being kind of good or bad, or what the outside world is seeing, is it important that you as actors like your character? I mean, do you have to really understand and get to grips with them in order to play them successfully, do you think?
I think I have to understand where they're coming from and why they're doing what they're doing, and their belief system, and why they feel how they feel, what's happened in their past, if it is something that is different to how I would think. But actually that character has a reason behind them, and I do have to find what that is in order to play it.
Yeah, I think that's exactly as Jade says. You sort of have to defend the character, I think, as a way. You're sort of, you're in charge of sort of defending them. And so when you say things like, "Oh, well, I don't think I would say that," or blah blah blah, I, I think it's not necessarily to make your character likable, but literally exactly as Jade said, you have to understand why they would make the decision that they do. So it's sort of a weird form of empathy or something.
And finally, obviously, one of the sort of the backdrop to this show coming out now is that a lot of shows and films at the moment haven't been successfully completed or haven't been able to come out when they would have liked to have done because of the world situation right now. Did that affect the shooting of His Dark Materials season 2? Was there anything that couldn't be shown that would have been because it wasn't filmed in time, or have there been any changes made because of the pandemic?
There was a whole episode, wasn't there?
So you've lost a whole episode.
Yeah, yeah.
And is that something that could be revisited in season 3?
I wasn't actually involved in the writing of that episode, but I know that there was. I mean, there are certain elements of that story which I think are definitely going to be folded into season 3. And yeah, I mean that's one of the big challenges, isn't it? Is reacting to what's going on, and just trying to keep the story flexible enough so that we're nimble, be nimble enough to react to it, but also I hope for mostly for Jack's sake, because I know he poured loads of love into that episode, that that story is able to be explored further down the line.
Well, we'll definitely keep our fingers crossed that is the case. And congratulations to all of you on being part of what is a really extraordinary show. I want to say a big thank you to the BBC and HBO and to Ian Johnson PR for their help in putting together this event. And a really massive thank you to Caroline, Jane, Ruta, Francesca and Andrew for being with us today to talk about the new series of His Dark Materials. Thank you very much to all of you.
Thanks, Justin.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.